Hi, and welcome to another episode of the ARC podcast with Jen and Lindsay. Jen, how are you today?
I'm great, Lindsay. I'm excited to be here today. We've got some great guests again, guys. Pretty proud of myself for bringing on some pretty good guests in the next few weeks. Lindsay and I have gotten to interview some good people, so I'm excited for this little season that we have. But I'm going to introduce. I have Tim Vogt. Tim has spent his whole career providing support for people with disability labels. He thrived and became executive director of a legacy organization called Starfire in Cincinnati. Their work was highly regarded, but Tim began to wonder if it was actually delivering a full life to all the people being supported. His answer was deeply distressing, so he decided to transform the organization to do whatever would be needed to give people full lives in the community. The book that he wrote is the story of that remarkable transition, the struggles, the complexity, and the emerging results. It is a leading edge example of what can be done to reform and refresh hundreds of organizations so all of us can be full citizens together. I'm so excited to have Tim Vogt on the program today. He wrote a book called Who's in Your Life, and we're going to be talking all about it. But I also brought on Ashley Hart because she is kind of part of this work that Tim's doing. And I thought, and she's a good friend of mine, and I thought this would be a nice program to put the two of them together to kind of see this in practice. So Ashley Hart is a mom of two young girls who lives in Loveland with the best neighbors. She has her master's in social work, but spends most of her time making Play-Doh and bottles these days. I get that. She's been involved with Starfire since 2015 and hosted her first family project in 2017. She's been helping her daughters and neighbors be named and known in their communities ever since. So thank you, Tim and Ashley, for being here.
It's a pleasure.
I appreciate it. And Tim, I want to start with you. Let's talk about your book, Who's in Your Life? I had the pleasure of reading it. I was completely immersed over Labor Day weekend. I couldn't put it down. I was bothering all the people in my life for like the next 2 weeks. Just, have you read this yet? Do you know about this? I obviously know about Starfire. I live in Cincinnati here. I've heard so many great things about you and your work over the years, but to read your book and to kind of see it all laid out was, I'm just going to say, it changed my brain. My brain is now on a different level because I thought I understood what you were doing, but I had no idea the depth and just intensity with which you did all this work. So can you just give us a synopsis of your book and, what led you to write it?
Sure. Well, it's essentially a story of my time over the last 20 years or so. In particular, my time of growing from starting work at Starfire and even before that, in just being a kid and learning about, how do people treat disabilities around me, and then getting a job at a summer camp, and then working at Starfire and becoming the executive director of the organization. And and then in that leadership, having to face the reality of the outcomes for people with disabilities. So it's the story largely of what I learned, which is essentially our culture makes life really hard for people with disabilities, and it makes life really hard for their families. And our system's reaction to that culture is to try to help. And I tried to help. But what I learned was what I thought was help was actually reinforcing the problems and the bad outcomes. So it's the story of how the culture and the systems kind of interrelate. And it's from my perspective because I lived all the sides of that coin.
Yes, you did. And you're so honest in the book, which I think just from being a Cincinnati native, it's really hard, especially if you're in like that top level of leadership in the city and people know you and know what you're doing and you're working with millions of dollars and fundraisers and donors, to be just for one, to do what you did, which I want to get into more, but just to be so honest about how this all works. So I just appreciate that, because for me and for other people like Lindsay and Ashley and all of us who try to do this work and are probably failing every day a little bit, it's nice, it's refreshing, because people don't tell the truth about, like their thought process and the failures and like what's working and what's not. You're just always trying to like kind of look good and pat yourself on the back and get a lot of pats on the back, and that's kind of what happens a lot to people in leadership positions. So thank you. Ashley, tell us about yourself and your story, and just kind of go into a little bit how about your little cute kids, Coralie and I just adore them. I read one of your friends when I was looking at your bio. I was looking at your Facebook page, and one of your friends said your girls were enchanting, and I thought that's a good way of putting it. Your family is enchanting to me. So tell me a little bit about yourself.
No pressure.
Yeah.
Let me be enchanted. So I grew up around people with disabilities. My mom worked for the board of what was MRDD at the time, and is awesome. She did amazing work. But I saw the reality of what people with disabilities faced in our culture and in community and family. And Coralie was a surprise diagnosis. So when she was born, I don't remember how old she was, but I took her to one of the community conversations, and she was itty bitty. You can't see my hands in a podcast, but tiny little thing. And I remember just weeping the whole time, because I was so worried about her safety and about her being known and about her feeling loved by the people that she encountered in her days as she aged. And so, and I felt like there was something happening in those conversations at Starfire, where people were imagining how to create opportunities and engagement with the community in relationship to the gifts that person brought with their life. And that was new to me, and so we started doing a family project. When I was my first family project in the picture, we planted Christmas trees in our back field and invited families to come and create a sensorial healing, just really cool family Christmas experience. And Coralie was strapped to me in like a little baby carrier. So she was itty bitty. She's 8 now. And then my other daughter, Selah, is almost 3. And we've navigated a lot of medical safeguarding around, and just humanizing of a person when they live in the hospital for a long time. So those are kind of some things that we've navigated, but ultimately we've discovered some incredible human beings that happen to be our neighbors, and really invested in these relationships and continued ongoing events or just reasons to get together and just keep playing the game of building relationships with the people around us.
Yeah,
I love
I've had the
that.
pleasure. I know, it's great. I've had the pleasure of walking around Ashley's neighborhood with her while she walked Selah around, and I just came over to bring her coffee or something because Selah was just little, and it was so inspiring. But she's not like overdoing it. She never is like pressuring me to be like, you need to do this stuff. This is so amazing. She just like is a model mom and a model citizen, which is kind of neat. Because I will not be pressured.
Right.
Because like one of my questions for Tim is like, I'm so tired. I don't have any more to give. I've already said to Tim before we started recording that I've always known about Starfire. I've heard so many great things. I think I've signed up for 2 or 3 community conversations like a decade ago when my kids were babies, and I never got over there. I never got to see the building that was there. I never got to see meet Tim or know what they were doing like in the past or now. So like I'm so excited that you've written this book because I do read a lot. So this is where I think you can meet a lot of us in what you've written, Tim, because you've really laid out the beginning of your career, working, in volunteering with just kids with disabilities at summer camps and stuff. And a lot of us start this work right there. And then you kind of go into, how you came to Starfire and became the executive director and just became a rock star, thriving there, getting some great donations and people that are, really like loving the work that you're doing. And then you kind of had this epiphany like, oh no, like, and can you kind of explain the epiphany? Was it I was kind of going through your book again. I read it and then I was like, was there one moment or was it just a bunch of moments that you kind of were like, wait a minute, I am doing the same thing as these other institutional settings that I'm trying not to do. I'm doing it too.
Yeah, I mean, it was a bunch of moments. I think we've already heard three great little lines, right? Jen, you brought up the question of honesty, right? And so I think one of the things that the book I was trying to write, it took me 7 years to write because I was trying to be honest and also to anonymize everything so that the citizens of Cincinnati wouldn't get too up in their feelings about it.
Yeah.
But I think that being honest about what's happening to human beings with disabilities who a lot of times, especially with people with intellectual disabilities, their voices are just, not heard. And possibly for reasons related to an impairment, possibly just because the way we think about what they have to offer or what they have wisdom to offer is just not counted. So I think being honest about that is a compelling kind of effort and a good thing. The other thing we heard was Ashley just saying about, how she was impressed by the imagination. And I think that that's another great word in that we are shaping the imagination every day of our culture by what we market to them, what we invite them into and don't invite them into, how we talk about disability. And I'm not talking about getting better words, right? I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about doing better. And then I think the last thing we heard was kind of like Ashley saying, let's keep playing the game. And I think that speaks to your question, Jen, about being tired is, well, I don't play football or soccer or baseball 24/7, right? But there are times when I have the energy for it. And I think that that's what at least I think I would notice about Ashley's block. I know we talk a lot about it internally is this isn't about, trying to force community. This is about just living the kind of life that's connected. And that is a good thing for us, our children, and the people around us. So it really is kind of the question of what we discovered. But to answer your question, what happened was I kind of had a best friend with Down syndrome. And when you have a best friend with Down syndrome, as a young person, and you watch the trajectory of their life and your life, and you care a lot about their life, you start to wonder about, is this really the best that's out there? And if you're in charge of something like I was that he was coming to, then you have to really think about, is the product I'm offering the best for him and for everybody else? So that was the first thing, was just being close to him and his family has been an incredible way to learn as well as to witness
I love
what's
that
going
part
on.
of your book. You
Mhm.
talk about how, I forget what happened to you. Something happened to you, and then he was the one that called you
Mhm.
to ask how you were doing, and you're like, did
Yeah.
all my other friends call me? Like, and like I didn't think of him maybe as a friend until that point. And then I was like, oh my God, like, of course we're friends. Like,
Yeah.
he cares about me and we have things that we do together that I actually really enjoy it and all these ways. And I find myself in my position doing that all the time where I'm like, oh, I'm here to help this person. Like I'm a
Mhm.
helper. That's what I do, you know? And then all of a sudden I'm like, man, I'm thinking about them a lot and they're adding so much to my life. And I'm like, oh, like this isn't like a helper helpee situation. This is like a real relationship. And I don't know, why do we do that? And that was one of the things that changed my brain from your book, because I thought, Jen, you're doing the same thing, sometimes with some of your relationships where you just constantly put them in a helper. I'm helping them
Yeah.
better their life, or something. And no, like this is a relationship, like it's back and forth.
Well, relationships are a form of help, right? Which is perfectly fine.
Yeah.
It's just the question of, is the person objectified? Do they become a tool by which you feel good about yourself solely, or the way that you share it with other people or something, right? And that's where we get into that volunteerism, and people with disabilities just get cast into that role where they're the object of everybody else's selfies and volunteerism. And I don't mind that, really. If people want to take selfies with me and say I helped him today, we dug out the compost or whatever, that's awesome. Let's go for it.
Yeah.
But the question is, on the other side, are we hanging out when we're not taking pictures of it? Are we talking to each other and supporting each other in a way that isn't public? So that's where I think the second interruption, at least in my career, was Jack Peeler, who lives up in Butler County and is got a really great history here in Ohio of advocacy. He and I had coffee yesterday, and he asked the question, just who's in your life? And he presented it to us. And I drew up this little chart of his talk and I showed it to him afterward. And I was like, whoa, so there's nobody without a disability that's not getting paid to be in the life of a person with disabilities? He's like, pretty much it. And then I started showing it to families and they'd say, yeah, it's pretty much it. And they would express some sincere grief at that. And if a family's telling me how they feel about it, then I could only imagine how it must feel if you actually have a disability. And whether or not you can process what's happening to you or not, I really don't care about that. I was really interested in, well, then let's be honest about what's happening to this person. Just because they're not marching down the street and demanding we all stop this, that doesn't mean that it's right.
Right.
So, and I had the responsibility to try to change things up. So I did.
You did. I know. I think a lot in terms of like capitalism, and like what I and my values are do not usually come together. Like I have a really hard time with it. Now I know that's going to sound like pretty crazy maybe on this podcast, but I think the Medicaid model and the model you're talking about that we've all used in all of our jobs here, at least at one point or another, has been it's based on our capitalistic society and how we determine, how we, help and do welfare kind of system here. And so I have a really hard time with it, but I also, as an attorney, think, well, this is the system we have. How do I use this system to help people that need help? And I just try my best to do that. When I read your book, I thought, well, what's your public policy then, Tim? Like, how do I change policy? So do you have any thoughts on that? Or are you like, I don't want to work within the government system anymore and that's for someone else to do? Like, tell me your desire for public policy, I guess, or if you have any thoughts on it.
Lots of questions in there. Number
I
one,
know.
I'm not interested in working in the government system, but that's only because I think somebody has to be outside it trying to figure out the future
Yeah.
and bringing back some evidence that says, hey, there's other ways to do this. So a lot of people would say, Tim, you got to do both.
Yeah.
And they're right. You do on a grand scale, because we can't pull the rug out from people that have become really, their lives are completely at the whim of the existing system. But if Starfire did both, we'd miss out on the opportunity to go out into the, wild beyond and figure out what's better. So I think that there's got to be room, and every company does this, right? R&D, research and development, and we just don't have that kind of mindset in our system. But there is when I wrote the book, I wanted to write it in as plain language as possible, right? I didn't want to really be in the 4-syllable words, but I did give myself one little kind of like, special privilege. And in the intro, I use the term, I think it is something like a financial efficiency scheme. And so I think that an answer is, let's be honest. This
Yeah.
is a business. The more that we're honest about this being a business, the more we actually will help families understand that it's just a tool. You're just using this like you would use Walmart, or like you would use McDonald's, or like you would use, the gas station. You're just using it. It doesn't define you. So just use it like a product. And if we would be very honest about that as a system versus saying, we love you, you belong here, you're part of our family, right? All that stuff. And then all of a sudden, everybody gets trapped into the idea that Starfire is got this person's whole life wrapped up. So I guess what I would say about Medicaid is this. I'm totally a fan of Medicaid. I want more of it. I want way more money. I want all the money in Medicaid. However, if you're asking me my public policy, I'd say um, the fact that Medicaid has structures by which people are billed in groups is the most dangerous thing to the life of a person with a disability. It financially incentivizes every provider to group as many people as possible within the boundaries of it, right? So one-to-one Medicaid all day. That's my answer. Let's just get one staff with one person at a time. One family gets funding at a time. So I do those two things as all Medicaid would be single. And I think that would go along with Olmstead and the ADA's intent, right?
Yeah.
But for some reason, we think that segregating a protected class of people with disabilities with federal, local, and state and county funds, that's just okay. But if we tried to segregate other people, we'd probably run into some problems. I'm just asking you as an attorney, correct?
Yeah. Right.
So
Yeah.
I think that's it. And I think people end up being seen. And this is just, again, from my perspective as the executive director, I saw everyone as a billable hour. I saw everyone's attendance as $42 a day,
Yep.
$7 an hour, right? And every minute that was missed, or every time I had to have that not in the budget, it created a problem. So that was always the king of my decision-making tree. And so if we don't recognize that we're treating human beings as billable hours, then we get trapped into our systems.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think when you're part of a nonprofit, you are trying to always, like, I think being part of a nonprofit is about community organizing, right? So you're always trying to organize your community and bring groups together because that's the most efficient way to do it. So, like, if we can just bring all the moms into one room, we can help support them, do family support group. If we can bring all the kids over here for a cooking class, we can teach all of them to cook at the same time. And so I think that's like part of nonprofit model. But what you said, and I think you say this right in your intro, is my number one piece of advice is to stop starting groups and grouping people with disabilities together because they're really hard to break down once they're together. And I think that's pretty powerful because I think a lot of times people have really great intent. Their intent is always good. But I see a lot of, nonprofits and different things that have really great intent pop up and they're meant to group people. And then you get caught into this system of like, basically now we're segregating people away from everyone else and not letting them be part of their community. Like Olmstead, I think anytime you brought up Olmstead and the reasoning behind it, that argument obviously makes sense to me. And it's like it's the way to go. Institutional, when you talk about the institution that you visited in Columbus area, and now that it's not there, there's graves there of people with numbers on them. It's powerful. I always worry, like parents like me, especially when my kids are little, I used to think, God, I don't want to hear about Willowbrook one more time. Like I can't be engaged with my kids on the floor and play with Play-Doh and then think about Willowbrook. Like, I'm sorry, I can't. But that's part of like this process that you did was like, we've got to bring that to the forefront because if we just forget about it or push it away, we'll just continue to do the same things over and over and over again. And Ashley, what do you think? Does that speak to you a little bit about like thinking about institutions and thinking about like those kinds of horrible
Yeah. I
places.
mean, it's a tough tension to carry,
It is.
to want to be enchanting,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And then to also be like, I understand the path that she will naturally be put on. And what I always say is like, give it a whirl. Like, try building community in your neighborhood. And if you really, at the end of the day, go, well, that was terrible, which I don't think you will, the system will welcome you right back. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, and as
Yes.
far as like policy and money go, I just cannot stop thinking, because I used to work in nonprofits before being a mom, is like how much, and I had studied in graduate school, like how much you're investing in your staff.
Mhm.
And when Coralie was first born, we signed up for Help Me Grow. This was my first sign that like, and they came into my home.
Mhm.
I made bread for them. Of course I did. And like every
You were
week,
their favorite.
yeah, they were here and I built a relationship with them. And then guess what? They left. And that
Mhm.
was my first sign of like, this is what we're going to be in for. Like people entering her life and leaving, and entering her life and leaving her life. And that's okay. Like, it's okay that neighbors move away. And it's okay that like she gets a job and changes job, like we all do that. But none of those were people that she chose, right? And none of those were relationships that she opted in for. And
Mhm.
so what's amazing to me is if you invest in a family and say like, I'm gonna put this little amount in a family, and believe them that they're not gonna like buy heroin with it, that they're gonna make some good choices for their family. It has, I mean, how long have I been doing this? Since she was born. She's 8. For 8 years, they've had free work in building connections and safety and support for Coralie that I wouldn't have known about if I hadn't been learning. You know what I mean? And so,
Mhm.
I mean, I know that's pie in the sky thinking for public policy, but I think we are trying to tell a different story, and hoping that, and I think we're seeing some funding um, options open up as people see like, oh, this is a different life and a
Yeah.
different story, and we can try something. So yeah, it is difficult to hold both. But the reality is you're holding it whether or not you name that or not.
I
Like,
know. I like
that's
the
no
idea.
teaching for me as a mom
Yeah.
to be holding that grief and to be holding hope at the same time, that she had inherent worth and giftings, and that culture was not on her side,
Yeah.
without a big reteaching and healing of culture through, and unfortunately through families doing the hard work.
It is families.
That's real,
Yeah.
not cool.
Mhm.
I
It's a
know.
lot
So
of work, but we get to be a part of we're a part of the beauty of it too. So there's
Mhm.
something really beautiful about, you know, our neighbor, 10-year-old, who has nothing to do with disability except for that she has a neighbor, my daughter, um, kind of taking the reins for our neighborhood, and being like, hey, are we still going to do that thing? And like, let's start planning for, that's something that we get to be a part of, because
That's amazing.
it is. That's what we want. And I go back and forth on it. And I think in one of my questions to Tim, like I said, like, I like the part of his book where he's like, well, I don't want to do this because I live around a bunch of assholes. And then he realized, wait a minute, I don't do anything for my neighbors. I'm the asshole. And I thought, oh man, because like I love, like, obviously I have like awesome neighbors around me that like we chit chat and things, and a Halloween and whatever. But then we all kind of just go back into our homes and do our thing. And then you kind of make up narratives about your neighbors and who they are, but you really don't. I mean, I've been living in my house for 18 years. And I will say, when I first talked to Ashley about her neighborhood and we were walking around her neighborhood, I was like, I think I even said this to you, Ashley. Well, yeah, one day when I move, I'm going to do this. Like when we move to a new neighborhood and we can like kind of start over and I won't know any of these people, like they don't have any preconceived notions about me. Like I will take this on and I will build a neighborhood full of really cool people that want to be all together and like, start a project. And when I read your book, I was like, man, Tim, because you thought the same things, but then you actually did it and proved in your book that this is the method that we should do. But why is it always like up to people like you and Ashley and me and Lindsay and to kind of take this initiative? Why aren't there neighbors in my neighborhood that like aren't doing this, that don't have kids with disabilities, that are like retired and have time on their hands, that are like trying to build the neighborhood stuff? Because I'm tired now. I don't have time.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I think that, I guess I would say you're not special. I wasn't special, right? Everyone around me was having the same absence and going along with it. And partly they were telling the same stories about me that I was telling about them, right? And so I think that we don't have to do it, but we are able to do it, which I think is important, is that you are able to talk to one person today. You are able to wave to somebody. You are able to hand out hot dogs at Halloween and talk to the kids and say, here you go. Have a great time. What a great costume. And so there's things that you can do today, next week, next month that are always available to us. But largely, we're going along with a very disconnected story. I mean, some of this, if you study it, like Robert Putnam's Bowling Alone, you'll see that television is a big culprit. We used to tell stories to each other and talk on the porches and hang out. Well, now we get to watch other people's stories and learn stories from our TV by ourselves, right? And so we're not necessarily we don't have the muscle that we once had, and I think we probably lost that stuff. But anyway, I think that's one thing, is that we have to think about disconnection and community as I mean, our Surgeon General last year wrote a book about it and said it's the #1 public health policy problem in the country. So that's a whole thing. And that's what Ashley's doing, is she's healing her block. That's what I'm trying to do, is heal my block, but only doing it through the power with which we have, which is to be a good person to the people around us, But I think that on top of that, there's also the question of, well, why aren't the people around me getting involved in the life of a person with a disability? And I just say that the way we think about this at Starfire is that they are. They're doing it exactly like we told them. For 50 years, we've said, here's what we want you to do, community. We want you to vote for the levies. We want you to donate to Starfire. And we want you to come volunteer 3 or 4 times a year to help us out, right? Now we can probably add, we want you to share and like it on, social media. But still, they're doing all of that. They're like the best employee I ever hired. They're doing everything we told them to do. As a system, the general public's doing exactly what we have been telling them to do. We've been letting them, off the hook for their real responsibility as neighbors and citizens and co-inhabitors of the planet at this time. However, we've also kind of trapped, again, their imagination and what they might do for someone immediately around them, right? This is the danger of groups, is if I was selling this big idea that come to Starfire and help Starfire, right? There's a chapter in the book that is really hard, again, to be honest about. Mom says, what the hell are you doing, Tim? Where are all the people? They're not my kid's life, right? Where are they? And I have to understand that, well, they are here. They're all volunteering for me. They're making me successful. They're making our organization successful. So the outcomes for us as a staff, and Starfire is just a microcosm, an example for the bigger system. We're all doing just fine, right? But then a mother's saying, I'm incredibly lonely, and she's expressing just a fraction of what her son might be feeling and experiencing. Yeah. So I think that your neighbors are going along with the social story the rest of us are going along with, which is hanging out by ourselves and getting hits of dopamine from our stories on television is good enough. And I think that they're going along with the story that Starfire and the system at large is selling about disability, which is those people go to Starfire. If you could write a check and volunteer once in a while, you'll be doing a great civic duty and we can all celebrate you and you can go about your life, right?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
feel
And
like
I think like when you're choosing a different narrative, you're interrupting the pattern and the narrative that they've learned. And so people who have the greatest hearts will help you see that, oh, like you're at the farmer's market with your kid, or oh, you're at a soccer game with your kid. And they will let you know where they want to connect you, and they'll let you know exactly where your kid should be going.
Yes.
With the best of intentions, because that's what we've been telling. And so I think there is a real thing that I do want to name as a mom, which is, gosh, like we want to be good moms so bad that we hustle so hard against so many systems, against so many things that are in our way. And then when we try something, gosh, it feels like rejection, like, and it hurts. Like,
It does.
it's hard. And so, and then you have to do it again and again and again. And the only way that like I keep doing that is by going like, we're disrupting a narrative that is way past like being disrupted. Like it's time for a new story. And we're going to do it with our bodies. We're going to put our bodies in places where we belong.
I signed Evie up for volleyball in the 4th grade. And it was like everybody's first year of volleyball, I think, maybe. So I thought, well, we're just going to do this, you know? She played volleyball with all of her 4th grade friends. And it was literally exactly what you just said, is a mom who was like one of the best moms there, who I was like, this woman is so inclusive of Evie. She's doing such a great job modifying everything for her, doing, you know, like she is 100% in there. And that mom said, guess what? Next year, when you sign up, we have our own Down syndrome volleyball league here, right at the same place. And you can sign her up for that. And isn't that great? And I just stood there like, I felt like the wind just got knocked out of my chest. And like these things are so painful to me. And I can't, I work so hard like at my disability stuff. I am like 100% involved in everything autism, everything Down syndrome, everything ARC, everything that can, you know, build people's lives up in their IEPs and their waivers and whatever they need. But I still think this is important. And I wonder, am I doing this? Am I putting this out there too? That like, because I'm involved in all these organizations that people are like, well, clearly like you're connected. Like those are the things your kids are supposed to do. And so then when I try to do something in my community or people just, I'm doing the same thing. And it's like so rejecting to me. And then I find my moms that have kids with disabilities to be so like much better than other moms. I just want to be with them and I just want to hang with them. So there is part of me that's like, I do want to just put my kids in like a Down syndrome volleyball game because then I can hang out with my moms and we're all good and it all feels good. I don't know. It's hard. The pain is really, really hard. And then if you see your child deal with that pain, you just want to protect them from that pain. So like the older that they get, the more they start to see that they're not part of it. And why aren't I being included in it? So it's not just my pain, it's like her pain.
Yeah.
It's
I hear you. And it happens every day to every kid, right? And the one thing is, you know, again, I think that there are ways to think about one form of self-care is to not be in the space where the pain is going to come, right? Um, institutional youth sports is a painful place, and their mindsets around it and why it exists are so messed
breaking
up,
up and
right?
disrupting that system, Tim, like
Yeah.
how do you
Well,
disrupt?
you don't have to disrupt. You don't have to. You let it be itself, right? So, for example, my dad, I grew up in rural southern Campbell County, which is kind of northern Kentucky.
Mhm.
And my dad would always hang out, like he would tell me about like where he grew up, that every day, every Sunday, his uncles and cousins, they all lived in the same holler, and they'd all get together in the field and play softball, right? And so we grew up a little more like less farmland, and we would play wiffle ball with everybody on our street. And our neighbor who had a disability would play wiffle ball with us, right? And so what I would say is, yes, you can play Down syndrome volleyball. You can go and experience the pain of institutionalized competitive volleyball. Whatever your jam is, go for it. But if you want to play volleyball, there are pools and front yards and backyards and playgrounds all around. And there's a lot of people that would say, dude, let's play some volleyball. Right. And if it's in the context of a luau, or if it's the context of the Olympics celebration, or if it's the
Mhm.
context of a neighborhood competition for all ages and intergenerational, you really end up into the fun of sports like that. So again, this gets us back to like that imagination question, right?
Mhm.
So if we're paying attention to one of my mentors is John O'Brien. Everybody knows John O'Brien, right? I remember John saying, Tim's pretty easy to think about what you want to like pay attention to. The way you do it is you ask, was it happening in the past and is it still happening now? Because if that's true, then it's going to keep happening in the future. So the reason why we study Orient and Willowbrook and asylums and horrific institutions is because it happened in the past. And honestly, the shape of that was Starfire's building. The shape of that is still alive in every van that carries 15 people around, or every outing, or every single special needs segregated experience. That's the shape of the institution. Bunch of staff, a defined space, who's in and who's out, and the way people participate. It's just that's the way it is. So you notice that, and it's the same thing with youth sports, right? You're noticing the same shape of that institution. And so you ask, well, if it continues, could I do something else? Right. And that's the imagination. So if we're honest about the shape of our experiences and how historically they've hurt us, they're still hurting us now. If we just keep going with that same shape, that same pattern, hey, it's on us then, because that's what we're investing our time in. And I know like that's one way in which people connect, and it's a big way in our culture. But there's also ways that we can take these little kind of escape pods out and do something that feels good. I think that's probably, at least from what I know, that's what Ashley's discovered, is she's got a ton of options that are outside of what the culture says is the dominant experience, right? So I guess I would say, from what I can tell, every aspect of our world is toxic to the life of a person with a disability. So if you're really closely connected to the life of a person with a disability, I think the question is, can we get outside of that at least once in a while and do something that feels healing, that feels good, that feels fun, that feels joyful? So that's what you probably experience when you're touring Ashley's neighborhood.
Yes. Oh, I don't even know. I have no words because that's exactly, there's a third path. There's another.
Always. There's always
Yeah, I
another
think
way. And
it's important to say like what you said earlier, which is like you don't have to do it all day, every day. Like there's lots of times, Jen, you know my life. Like there's lots of times that I have had to totally check out. And then I pop back in, and you become known as a person who loves to do stuff. And so, like you start to kind of have um, people know you, and they know that like, hey, we're doing that thing. We should invite them. And that it doesn't happen every day. We don't get invited to things every single day. In fact, sometimes we get left out. And, like you'll experience the full range of human experience, which I appreciate. I don't want Corley to be invited to things because she has a disability.
Right.
I just want us to be remembered sometimes. I want to play sometimes. And, we're kind of betting our lives, hoping that changes lots of narratives that lots of people have in our neighborhood and our families. But it's not through any big sweeping thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Like we dropped some pears off on somebody's porch and said we got some extra pears. Not hosting a big like block party.
I know.
Just,
See,
dropping some pears off.
like, why does my brain always go to like, okay, I have 288 houses in my neighborhood. Do I make 288 flyers and like, like, why do I always have to think so big about it?
I mean, you can, but like sometimes you just don't have that space. And so.
Because I think I want to not deal with my block. Like, that's like the people that are closest to my house. I'm so like, oh, it's so vulnerable to be like, should we all do something together? Or like, if I drop off pears to their house, are they going to be like, oh, now I have to do something for them? Or I don't know, like there's just something really vulnerable about it to me that I'm like putting us out there when I think I've purposefully shut us off from like some of it because it was painful, because their kids all play together and my kids didn't fit the mold of what was going on, and it's not safe. Like some of the things their kids run all over by the creek and do things, and I have to like helicopter a little bit more, and it's just we don't fit anywhere, it feels like, except with our peers in the disability community, because they get us and they'll be like, oh, who cares, like your kid's having a meltdown, like it doesn't, you don't get the looks and the.
Yeah. And what I found is with our neighbors is like, if I don't let them practice getting a relationship and building a relationship with Corley, just like if I don't get to practice with my own neighbors, they're not going to have the opportunity to get it right. And they have to have sometimes where they get it wrong and you're like, oh, come on. And then other times where you're like, that's magic. Like, no.
I know, but it speaks to me to live in like a compound setting, but I want to pick the people I'm next to. It's funny, like Chris and I were looking for a new house this like 5 years ago, and we were looking on this one street, and this lady comes out and she's like, I saw your daughter. This is the perfect street to be on. We already have 2 neighbors who have kids with disabilities. It was like a pod of houses, like on a cul-de-sac, and everybody had a disability on that cul-de-sac. And Chris was like, this is perfect. We should buy this house. And I thought, oh, no, we don't want to buy this house, like, which shouldn't be like this. I always feel it in my gut. I just don't, it's a hard, like, I know we shouldn't be segregating ourselves away from everyone else. It's just, it just seems like a lot of hard work and vulnerability involved in doing the work you talk about, but it is necessary. And I do it in other ways, like in my other things that I do in my life. So why is it so hard? Because it's so close to me, I guess. That's the disability piece with my kids.
I think that you're right, Jen. I think the call of the exact moment now, I think, is to invite and invest in our general public and community, right? So the way we think about inclusion, it's like a product. And so one of the things that we're noticing is just like, let's just take Cincinnati, for example, right? There's 1 million people in greater Cincinnati. Roughly 20,000 have intellectual disabilities. On average, they have about 3 people in their family. So 20 times 3 is another 60,000 people. And then there's probably 10,000 or less people involved in the biz of disability services. So we're talking about 10% of the population of greater Cincinnati has a disability, a loved one who has a disability, or is in the biz thinking about volunteering, working at disability. That means there's 900,000 people that could provide a tiny bit of inclusion, a tiny bit of belonging, of connection. But again, we're not doing much to help them understand their possibilities and we are also making them think that they got to go through the machine to do it. Whereas what we could be doing is saying, and this is our kind of our effort, we think our newest effort is how do we start now for the hopes that in 10 to 20 years, we have a more welcoming, hospitable general public, right? And we have to say, you can volunteer and vote and donate. That's great. Thank you. And know someone in your place of faith. Offer someone on your block a chance to drive to the grocery with you so you can both get your shopping done, right? So we're just kind of asking, like, who's on the list? Who's not? How about you invite one person who's not on the list to be on the list this year? Next year, you can invite another, right? But I think that's where you're right. You shouldn't have to be responsible for providing inclusion. Neither should your child, right? I mean, that's really not fair. It's the general public. However, we've done nothing to tell them that that's even a possibility. And the whole story of Starfire is discovering that when you get it down to the person's name and the one individual person, you can start to define their life and their identity and their location in a way that other people do pop up. Not everybody, right? There are still assholes out there.
Mm-hmm.
But slowly you start to discover there are people that actually can respond to this invitation pretty well. But like Ashley says, they got to have the chance. They got to know, is it okay to push the wheelchair? Is it okay? Is it okay to talk to this person directly? Does everything got to go through their parents, right? And we're just here to teach them. And I always say this, y'all as parents are the best evidence that this is possible because you were once citizens who didn't have children with disabilities.
Right.
You learned how to take them on vacation and have dinners with them and read a book with them and celebrate a holiday and blow out some candles. Like, you did all those things, and you can now teach other people how that is possible. Not as intensely as you, because you got a moral and legal and otherwise responsibility. But I think that we're just making the wrong invitation to the public. And Starfire was complicit in that. I was complicit in that. And when you notice that what you're doing is causing other people problems, you have an opportunity to correct that anytime, as in small ways and big ways. And that's the whole point of the book is we can make connections with our neighbors. We can start today. We can also change the way that we do business. We can start today. It might take 7 years, like it did for us. You might take you, I mean, seriously, we started knowing our neighbors in 2010, and it's now 14 years later, but it's taken us 14 years. What a great way to live a life, right? And that's kind of the whole point.
Beautiful. Tim, tell
I
us
love that.
the book, where we can find the book, and Starfire, how people can get in touch with you there.
Well, you can find the book right now at inclusion.com. So our publisher is based out of Toronto, and they hold so much of the history of, in my opinion, the best work around the values of inclusion. So they have books on hand. We did tell them to ship us an extra few books because the first batch is gone. So we're out of books, and so they can get in touch with inclusion.com, order book, as well as if they want to get in touch with Starfire, it's just Starfire Cincy with a y.org. And you can just look up Starfire Cincinnati and find us there.
That's great. I really appreciate you both being here. Ashley, can you end with maybe a little story or maybe a little nugget of advice, maybe for people? I think the one other thing that I thought was really poignant about the book was the pattern of rejected, controlled, lonely, limited that Tim put in the book over and over and over again. And I thought, gosh, here it is again. But then I thought, oh my God, it's like, it was making sense as I read through the pages, like more and more. And I understood the repetition because I need repetition to like actually make it make sense. But that is the tragic pattern that we see is rejected, controlled, lonely, and limited. And we're trying to flip that, at least in the great work that you both are doing. So Ashley, you want to give like maybe a little ender to our
Sure.
podcast, just because I know you're so enchanting and I just feel like you can send us off.
Well, I just don't want people to feel pressure, because
Yeah.
if you feel pressure, then you're never going to start.
Yeah.
And so my dream for continuing to tell our story and take time from playing with Play-Doh and making bottles, my dream is that people say, you know what, like maybe I am tired, but maybe it's worth me taking my cup of coffee and just walking up and down this block today. Or maybe it's, you know, on Sunday, we're gonna like, instead of driving to a park that's far away, we're gonna just, our family's gonna walk to the park there. So I think just try something. And it doesn't mean you have to change your whole model for living life today, but just consider it a little experiment, a little playful thing. We ask our kids to play all the time, and we ask our kids to try new things all the time, and things where they might be rejected, they might be wrong. I mean, we ask that so often of them. And so my ask is just like, let's try it ourselves. Let's try something and see what we discover, and be looking for the magic. And told me that once. Be looking for the magic, because sometimes it shows up and really beautiful things happen.
Yeah, and we could always fall back to the system if we need it.
Sure.
Call me when you need the system. But well, thank you, Tim Vogt, and thank you, Ashley Hart, for being on the podcast today. So much to think about, and we just really appreciate all of your efforts and everything you're doing. And definitely check out the book, guys. Who's in Your Life? Thank you.